All right.
Hey, good morning. This is Todd Dalton with Equinix. How is everyone today? I hope you're doing well. Just quickly before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. Please put yourselves on mute. And if you do have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat window, and we'll be addressing those a little bit towards the end of the presentation. So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. And thank you for joining us. And welcome to this solution-based session brought to you by Microsoft, Rubrik, and Equinix. In some sense, the disruption to normal business activity has created an opportunity for enterprises to evaluate our IT platforms. Some verticals of our economy have slowed down, while others have seen a steady and even explosive increase in activity. Either way, we're left to ask ourselves, how's our business continuity posture? How is our ability to back up, manage, and recover data as we distribute applications across global platforms? How nimble are we to quickly increase capacity, provision, and deliver on the needs of the business? And lastly, how well are we leveraging the innovative services available in Azure? So however your business has been impacted over the past several months due to this unique business climate created by COVID-19, what remains common for all enterprises is that data continues to grow exponentially, and the challenge to move, manage, and secure it requires partnership of industry leaders working closely with our customers. So today we're going to share innovative ways to modernize your hybrid cloud data management strategy and provide specific examples of how you can employ flexible, on-demand solutions that enable the resiliency you require on this journey. And to be clear, with the strong trend we're seeing, especially given today's business climate, that journey is about continuity coupled with cost reduction. How do you innovate while reducing costs during this time will determine whether you bounce back or whether you actually bounce forward. So together, Microsoft, Rubrik, and Equinix will be highlighting solutions that empower just that, while ensuring performance at the edge is consistent, and you can accelerate your ongoing efforts to incorporate Azure as a larger part of your IT mix. We will specifically outline how our three companies coupled together are very complementary, and we will share blueprints for you to adapt and drive innovation while simultaneously controlling your OpEx destiny. So while demands on the business will always be changing, our goal is to help you have a flexible, service-oriented architecture enabled by Microsoft Azure, Rubrik, and Equinix, so you can move at the speed of business. So let's get on to our presenter introductions. Ms. Rob, if you could advance the slide for me, please. We've got some great presenters for you here today. We have Saurabh from Microsoft. We'll wait just a second while the slides advance.
I'm unable to do that at the moment. Todd, oh, there we go.
Oh, hey, a lot of people online these days, so I'm sure the bandwidth is challenged as usual. So Saurabh Sharma is the Microsoft Senior Product Manager. He's going to be covering the Microsoft portion. Evan Shelley, Rubrik Sales Engineer, will be obviously discussing Rubrik and the advantages in their cloud data management platform and how it's delivered in Azure. Chad Arnold, Equinix Sales Director, is going to be discussing some of the best practices and the blueprint designs and things we're doing with our customers to enable that business continuity, WAN optimization, and data center modernization. And Josh Sordelay, our Senior Global Solutions Architect, will be discussing or sharing with us some whiteboarding and some examples of what they're doing to help our customers modernize and address the business challenges today. So without further delay, Rob, I'd like to pass it on to you to get started with today's presentation.
Thanks a lot, Todd, and good morning, everybody. Hope all of you are doing safe. That's the most important thing right now, absolutely. And I think, as Todd mentioned, this particular situation has presented some very interesting challenges to the business community and to the IT community in particular. And what we're going to do in today's presentation is to see how Microsoft, Rubrik, and Equinix together provide a very, very critical set of solutions for your data and your data management in this world of IT infrastructure modernization, which is basically the backdrop of everything that is happening today. I'm trying to advance the slides, but I'm not able to do that for some reason. It's really slow. So apologies about that. But what we're going to specifically talk about and what I'll present to you today is, in particular, Azure Storage. And the reason Azure Storage is one of the key topics of discussion today is when we talk to customers in terms of how they think of modernizing their IT, and especially in terms of reducing costs, they really only say one thing. They say, we want to get out of the infrastructure business. It's very difficult to manage infrastructure, given special situations such as this one, where we have customers saying, we use tapes, but then our vendors have not been able to get to us when we need to do recoveries, or for that matter, we've not been able to essentially offload our data and offsite them into tapes. So storage is a big problem. There are obviously fresh cycles of hardware refreshes, which present these kind of opportunities where businesses can really think about modernizing their storage infrastructure. And the public cloud, especially Microsoft Azure, through Azure Storage, provides a very, very interesting proposition. So let's dive deep into it. Let's see if we can advance the slides now. All right, this is going really slow, but then I guess we need Equinix here to speed up our bandwidth. All right, so the questions that we get from customers, and absolutely the first one, is there enough bandwidth available to migrate my data into the cloud? And this is a very, very important question. We have customers all over the place, businesses of all sizes. What everybody is really looking for is a reliable, robust channel to make sure they can reliably offsite their data into a secure cloud platform. And the question really comes is, how do we connect to that cloud? How do we migrate that data into that cloud in a very efficient manner? Not to forget, how do I know my data in the cloud is safe from malicious attacks? And this is especially topical with regards to COVID-19, because remote work is the new normal. And when you have remote work happening, people are connecting from all sorts of devices. They're connecting from all sorts of terminals. They are using non-corp connections to access their business critical data. Now, how do you secure that environment? How do you make sure everything is going right? Next up, how does all of this allow me to optimize and reduce costs? And this is one of the key topics of discussion today in the IT world, because let's face it, as businesses are facing this particular challenge, IT budgets are continuously shrinking. How do we make sure we can reduce both the fixed cost of assets that we own as well as the operational cost of managing those assets? So we'll try to cover these particular concerns in the section of the presentation. All right, let's go to the next slide. What is Azure Storage? So let's talk about Azure Storage, which is Microsoft Azure fully managed platform service for modern data storage scenarios. And when we talk about fully managed, what we mean is you don't need to worry about any infrastructure. It is completely offloaded to Microsoft Azure. We make sure we give you the capacity. We make sure it's highly scalable, highly available, and definitely the most secure data storage platform available today. And not only that, since I was talking about remote work, we want to make sure that this is accessible globally from each and every corner of the world using multiple different protocols. Now, when we talk about Azure Storage, we typically have three fundamental storage services. The disk storage, which is basically Azure Storage block storage service. Object storage, which is the highly exabyte scale object storage service, which we call Azure Blobs. And file storage, which is basically the file storage service of Azure, which comprises of Azure Files. And with our partnership with NetApp, we also now have the option of Azure NetApp Files. So typically, customers have had a lot of infrastructure footprint on NetApp. And now what Azure can do very recently is to be able to host NetApp infrastructure in a dedicated fashion within Azure data centers. And what it does, it gives a very, very consistent interface through the Azure portal for customers to be able to access that NetApp layer. Now, when we talk about storage in particular, there are various needs that customers have from the storage layer. So there are various performance architectures which exist with regards to storage, whether it's disk storage or object storage or file storage. But in particular, we will talk about object storage today. But lower down, you see these two items, data transport and hybrid storage. And really, we do have services in the form of Azure Data Box, Azure Data Box Gateway, and Data Factory to be able to move or migrate your data into Azure. Now, these are native services which basically Azure provides to our customers to make sure they can reliably move their data via offline or even online mechanisms through these services. The last one is particularly interesting to this presentation because as the world is thinking about offloading infrastructure or moving data to the cloud, it's not going to happen in a day. So things are going to remain hybrid for some time, and that is the state of most enterprises today. Stack Edge, Azure File Sync, and HPC Cache address these scenarios very, very effectively, where you're literally extending the abilities and the functions that Azure provides to your edge environment on premises and really operate in a hybrid model where you can not only get the benefit of what you get within Azure in your on-premises environment, but also be able to manage that infrastructure in a very effective manner. In particular, today, our topic of discussion is going to be centered around object storage, which is Azure Blobs. And Azure Blobs is one of the key cornerstones, or rather the foundational pillars of data protection when it comes to Azure, because Azure Blobs is the highly scalable, unstructured data platform, which is used by our partners all across the board, and especially someone like Rubrik, who's actually taken this data management capabilities to the next level using some of the key capabilities provided by the object storage platform. And why object storage is very interesting is also because as customers back up their data and look at the cloud in terms of extending that offsite into the cloud, they really need a place which is highly scalable, secure, and cost effective to be able to do that. And not only that, the good thing about object storage is that, or Azure Blobs, is that your data can actually work for you while it is sitting there through the new insights and analytics capabilities, which are provided by the recently introduced Azure Data Lake services. So what you have there is not only a repository for your backup data, which is secure and off-sited, but also a mechanism for you to be able to use that data for things like dev test, for things like ensuring you have an extremely robust DR plan. And those are some of the things that Rubrik enables especially well. So we will talk about that aspect in the later part of this presentation as well. Now, let's talk about something very, very critical in these times of crisis. We do understand that there is no benefit in having a single point of failure when it comes to anything today in the IT infrastructure world. And Azure Storage is no different. In fact, Azure Storage goes a step further to ensure you have multiple options of redundancies and ensuring that you reduce the probability of a single point of failure. So going all the way from the left, what we have is a bunch of redundancy schemes, which are basically from LRS, which is a locally redundant storage ability, where there are 3 replicas of every single object or blob that you send to Azure Storage. And we basically perform, effective encoding and erasure techniques to make sure we save your cost while we save these replicas in either a single region within a single data center, which is the LRS scheme of high availability, locally redundant storage. Or we also have the option of basically diversifying into multiple availability zones or other multiple data centers within a single region. And that is what we call ZRS, or zonally redundant storage. But we take it to the next level. What if there are region level disasters or failures or natural calamities? We also replicate your data asynchronously within a matter of milliseconds across a paired region of Azure and allow you to be able to even read that data on demand using the read access globally redundant storage, which is the third option in this screen from the left. Now, what this does is it gives you not only an ability to basically have highly redundant, durable, and highly available storage in your original or primary region, but in case you want to basically have a DR plan in another region, you can use these capabilities to be able to on demand read data off of the second region by using the read access globally redundant storage capabilities. Now, some of the things that we are also doing is also the ability to not only replicate to another region from a single data center, but also from multiple data centers. And that is a capability which is in preview today. We call it the RAGZRS, where the Z actually stands for zonal. So now you have an option where you have 3 copies living in 3 different data centers. And by the way, to save costs, we do not replicate it in the other region to 3 different data centers, but to the same data center. And that's where you have 3 replicas in the other region as well. So all of these capabilities and the flexibility to have things like customer initiated forced failovers or even planned failovers, which is something in our roadmap, we make storage and contents of that storage highly available on demand. Now, let's come to one of the core asks, or rather the core concerns that customers have when they think about migrating data to the public cloud. How do you migrate petabytes of data to Azure effectively, right? And this is one of the key questions, especially in the context of backup and recovery, because you do need that robust channel, that reliable channel to offsite your data without missing any SLAs, without making sure your data is basically held hostage in case of an attack, which happens in your network or in your on-premises environment. So you really do need a very secure, private, and reliable data connection into Azure.
74 people on the call. I wonder how many of my customers showed up.
I think there is somebody who's not on mute. Okay. All right. So sorry for the interruption there. Really what ExpressRoute is basically a way for you to extend your on-premises data center into Azure using a private connection. So there is absolutely no use of the public internet. What you have is a dedicated channel which is meant for your private network and which is enabled beautifully by partners like Equinix. So what you have to do is to basically just pick up the phone, call Equinix and say, hey guys, we need to send massive amounts of data into Azure and Equinix will do the rest for you. So starting from options like Microsoft peering, which allows you to basically get a very, very dedicated channel of your data into Office 365 or Dynamics, or even Azure Public Services, which is what you will technically use if you're backing up data to Azure Blob, to even Azure private peering for virtual networks. So if you want to have a virtual network to secure your specific IT environment and really operate in a truly secure hybrid model, ExpressRoute can enable even that for you. Now, one of the things that is very, very interesting with ExpressRoute is the network ingestion or the network-based ingestion to Azure storage is free of charge. So you don't get charged when you basically ingest data into Azure storage using ExpressRoute. There is also an option to basically have a predictability in terms of cost when you want to use ExpressRoute Direct Local. And ExpressRoute Direct Local provides the option to have a fixed port fee per month and no per GB egress charges. How is that useful? Well, when you want to orchestrate your recoveries, you actually have to take data out of Azure storage into your on-premises environment, thanks to Rubrik's capabilities in terms of restoring back on premises, right? And that is where you really need that dedicated and secure channel. And this is a great option to pre-provision that egress without having to pay per GB for that egress. So great option, especially for customers that are looking to migrate petabytes of data into Azure, enterprises who have main data centers which are globally located. And the coverage that Equinix provides is brilliant. I think we're going to have the Equinix folks, our friends from Equinix, talk about it in detail. But I'm super excited to hear more about that. I'm sure you are as well. So now we've sent our data into Azure. Now the question is, how do we store that data cost effectively in Azure? And I really love the fact that there are so many options that are available and they address different degrees of cost and performance. So when it comes to the Azure Blob, you can basically have prices as low as $1 per terabyte per month, right? And one of the things that you would see in this slide is that we do have extremely high performance premium blobs, which is available for essentially applications and highly demanding compute or rather access to storage required for applications within the cloud. But we also have hot, cool, and archive tiers within Azure Blob for various levels of access in terms of your data. So as you would have guessed from now, if you're offsiting your data into the cloud in terms of backup, you would not be accessing it very frequently unless you have the need to recover in case of, say, an accidental deletion, or if you want to stand up your environment within Azure, or rather basically have a dev test environment that you have an on-demand job for, but then you would not be continuously accessing or frequently accessing that data. So the cool layer and Rubrik's integration with the cool layer enables you to really get the benefit of cost when it comes to keeping your backups in the cloud. And the best part about this entire offering is the fact that we do have archive capabilities, which is really the question customers ask today is, all the storage layers that you have are online storage layers. So they are still accessible by network. They're still vulnerable to attacks and so on. But the archive layer is really an offline layer. And that is basically where we have a lot of advantage in terms of freedom from management and migration of huge quantities of storage hardware. So you don't need to do that. You just offload it to Azure, and we provide you extremely fast retrieval times. In fact, we just released something which allows you to retrieve archive data within hours instead of days, as you would have with tapes, especially in situations like right now during COVID-19. Now let's come to the most important part of this presentation, which is basically about locking it down. And when I say locking it down, it's really about securing that environment within Azure Storage. And Azure Storage has some wonderful options to be able to do that, starting from access control. So one of the things that you must know is that everything that you put in Azure Storage is encrypted. If it is not encrypted by the source, it is encrypted by Microsoft within Azure using Microsoft provided keys. But also there is an option for customer managed keys on the Azure Key Vault. So the customer can actually, encrypt their data using customer managed keys and keep those keys in the Azure Key Vault. And so basically you have a complete end-to-end management of your keys. You can even roll them over if your infrastructure compliance requirements point towards that direction. Or you can even provide your custom keys via an on-premises tool. And so you could use any sort of tool within your IT environment on premises, have your own keys and store those keys on premises as well, or even third-party key stores. So all those options exist with encryption. Now, when it comes to security, we give a lot of importance to identity, and Azure AD leverages two-factor authentication, conditional access, and even identity protection. And basically, all these managed identities can be used to build apps with no secrets for your Azure resources. So it provides the end-to-end capability of ensuring who's accessing your data, when they are doing it, and for what, right? And that is exactly where role-based access control comes in, which allows you to give the least level of privilege to the individuals who have to perform a certain task, such as basically changing policies or recovering data and so on with contents of Azure Storage. I'm not able to move the slide forward for some reason. All right, now this is the fun part, right? What if it so happens that malicious attacks end up happening, in terms of your particular environment in the cloud? And yes, we do have a design paradigm which is basically assume breach. So we want to make sure we secure the environment for the eventuality that even if a malicious attack can happen on Azure, how do we protect against that attack? So we do have resource locks, which is a very, very handy capability in terms of protecting your storage accounts. And so you can prevent your storage accounts from accidental or malicious deletion, by either a rogue admin or even ransomware in certain scenarios. So this is a very, very handy capability. And what it does, it allows you to set read locks, write locks, or even delete locks on your storage account. So if you want to basically hold off something and make it read only, you can do that using resource locks as well. The next aspect is basically, the introduction to data protection. And when I talk about data protection, we really want to make sure no blobs or objects which are created by partners like Rubrik on the Azure storage layer are deleted because of accidental deletion or even malicious deletion of these objects. And so there is a capability we provide, which is called soft delete. As you can see on the right, we call it blob soft delete. And all you need to do is just to click a button and enable it. And what happens is if a blob is deleted, it is available to you to recover from, just like a recycle bin, depending on the retention policy that you set. And very soon we will have account backups where you'll be able to specify a storage account and back up all the blobs without using any infrastructure within the Azure platform. So really that completes the story of not only securing what is there in your hybrid environment in terms of data and offsiting that securely and cost effectively to a public cloud provider like Microsoft Azure, but also the end-to-end capabilities of securing and ensuring that there is enough gates from deletion or tampering of that data within that public cloud platform. And all of this while making sure that your data is still accessible to you for performing analytics, for performing advanced use cases of data management, as you will very soon see in the next section of this presentation from Rubrik. Over to you, folks.
Hey, Saurabh, can you hear me? Just want to make sure my audio is working because I got muted.
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. All right, thanks so much. Thanks so much for that presentation. I think it's a perfect segue into Rubrik and what the value Rubrik brings to this partnership between Microsoft, Equinix, and Rubrik. And what I really want to go through in the next few minutes is a presentation of Rubrik, why we were founded, what our value prop is, and then how we partner so well with partners like Equinix and Microsoft. Azure specifically. And so if we kind of head back a little bit, the story of Rubrik really is a story of understanding our history and understanding the history of backup and the value of backup within a data center. Backup has always been a critical thing, but no one likes to talk about it. You never start a conversation with, well, how's your backup today? But it is one of those things that when something dramatic happens, it's one of those things, it's an insurance policy. You need to make sure it works when you need it to work. And so you'll see back in, historically within the data center, backup had a large footprint within the data center for multiple reasons. One, it was important, but two, it was complex, and it was built over a period of time without a lot of focus on things like futuristic cloud, without automation, and without looking at security as a focus in the forefront. And so what you'll see historically is you'll have dedicated backup softwares running on dedicated backup servers. If you have to scale past certain points, you might need to add proxies for ingest capabilities, catalog databases, so on and so forth, even all the way out to tape, and then offset archive with those tapes. And the way that backup was traditionally designed from the 1990s up until present, it was never really focused on the three main pillars of cloud automation or security. And so when Rubrik took a look at this, when our founders looked at the landscape, we said, what if we could simplify this entire scope? And if we could take this, basically this data center within a data center to provide secondary copy of your data and restore capabilities, and if we could lay it down on a single software fabric that's really focused holistically on cloud adaptability, full automation, and security first, that would really free up a lot of time within the infrastructure for both backup admins as well as other administrators within the data center to take their time to more important aspects of the data center. And so that's really what Rubrik did, is to take all the complex components of traditional backup and force those into a single software fabric that could lay across really any infrastructure. And we'll talk about that in a second. And so this is how Rubrik fundamentally works. Really, our first inherent design was, if we're going to make a software stack and we're going to simplify the overall architecture, we need to simplify the user experience as well. And so Rubrik, what we call, is simple setup and simple to use. So we can come into a data center, throw down what we call a brick. So so creatively named after our name, Rubrik, and it can be deployed and ingesting that data and backing up your data within 30 minutes of racking, stacking, and plugging it in. Very easy to configure, very easy to set up, which is, in contrast to traditional backup where you have software servers and lots of other components. It takes, sometimes hours to days of implementation. Then the other is focusing on all enterprise apps, right? Having a single point solution that can cover the entire landscape of your enterprise software stack to back up, secure, and protect. The major differentiator, one thing that we brought out when we first came to market, is the ability for what we call instant recovery, instantaneous recovery off of our platform. In the event of a disaster that might not need you to recall data from a cloud, but if you need to recall data quickly from an on-premises solution, you can very easily perform what we call an instant recovery or a live mount across virtual infrastructure, across databases, and across other sources to provide that data within seconds. If a VM gets corrupt or something happens, you can instantly provision that VM and provide it off of our platform in the time it takes that VM to boot. So we can provide that as an NFS data store off of our platform back to an ESXi host of choice or Hyper-V host of choice, provision that VM and boot it up and make it available, and then move the data in the background when you need to move it back to your production storage. So some really cool capabilities. We can do that across, again, VMs as well as databases for large databases, small databases, whatever the work set requires. And then, so that's just within the infrastructure. How we really differentiated within the data center is simplifying all of what you had historically while enabling you for new future use cases around instant recovery. Now, when we talk about cloud adoption, what we first realized is that, as was mentioned early on in the presentation, that tape is no longer sometimes viable option for a lot of companies when we talk about the speed of recovery and then also the validity of the data, long-term retention, and the total cost of ownership. Cloud has really, Azure specifically with the introduction of archive tier, have really started to take the cost of tape off the table and say we can provide a much better and more secure solution for your data retention at a lower cost. And so when Rubrik looked at that, we said, well, we need to adopt the cloud first and foremost to help reduce customers' overall total cost of ownership. And so our first introduction to cloud adoption was using cloud as an archival target. So instead of buying multiple Rubriks and continue to store all of your data on premises within the data center, we can allow you to only store what you need for the time, the period that you need it, well then after a period of time archiving that data out to a cloud provider such as Azure. And one of the things that we talk about, that is a huge enabler is Equinix's ability to help us build a large enough pipe to make sure we can migrate that data in an efficient and secure manner between your on-premises data center and your cloud provider of choice. But what we also want to provide is the ability not to have to pull back all of the data when you request it. And so what we allow for is even if the data is moved off of the Rubrik platform, the way that we've ingested the data, the way that we've indexed the data allows for single item granular search, both on the platform itself on premises on the brick, as well as in the cloud provider. So if you had to go and recover a single object or a single file, instead of having to go and pull back an entire 2 terabyte virtual machine image or file share, you can actually go and retrieve just the object. And so that helps both with egress out of Azure as well as the band utilization, across your Equinix pipe. And so although we need those partnerships to help get the data out, we want to also help be efficient to help kind of retrieve the data as needed. And then lastly, is that file level recovery. So we can search across everything and then give you that granular file level recovery without having to pull object pulls. The other major advantage that we have with Azure, we'll talk about on the next slide, is being able to take advantage of all storage tiers that Saurabh mentioned and went through within the Azure Blob storage. So the last component that we want to talk about with how Rubrik works is actually one thing that's very important. We kind of mentioned security today in the COVID era, is that we were built from the ground up with security in mind. So first and foremost, you'll see that we're ingesting data from hosts. We're pushing data out to archive targets like Azure over Equinix pipes, but we do that all end-to-end in an encrypted manner. So both when the data is coming to us, we pull that traffic in an encrypted manner. We land that data and secure that data in an encrypted manner on our file system. And as we push the data out, we do that in an encrypted manner. And we also allow you to manage the encryption keys for the blob store where that data is landing. So even at rest within the blob store in Azure, you have the encrypted data, both from the Rubrik side, but then also the Azure side. So encryption is key to us for data protection. And then the last part of this is something that is really cool, and I'm going to kind of let the cat out of the bag. We didn't inherently design this. We designed our file system for a specific purpose, for purpose-built backup and protection, but a microcosm of that, and really a natural effect of the way that we built our file system, is that we're fully immutable to any kind of attack. We never expose our file system as a file share. So we first and foremost never provide access to our data, but every time we ingest a backup and every time we pull in data, we seal and protect that data in an immutable format so that nothing, not even our own file system, can go in and change those files. It's an append-only file system. And so it gives you full protection from any kind of ransomware or any kind of malicious attack. And then on top of that, what we've built just outside of the platform and protecting you against that data vulnerability is we built additional products like Radar, which is a product that that uses advanced machine learning to understand the change rate within your environment, as well as the file types and extensions that are within your environment. So we can do things like entropy scans. We can look at file change rate between certain backup points and identify anomalous behavior within your environment. Flag an anomalous event, we can actually identify when that happened and then go back in and scan the file system and identify exactly what files were changed and what files look suspicious based on the type of file that they are, and then present a recovery plan, a remediation plan for you to recover those files within a 3-click process. So not only do we identify that an event has occurred, we help you identify a ransomware attack, we help you understand and scope the attack surface, and then recover within a 3-step process, which is hugely beneficial for a lot of customers that actually have been affected by ransomware and have used our platform to recover. So taking that a step further with the cloud adoption, and I'll speed up here in respect to time. When we talk about on-premises is where we really started utilizing the cloud as an archive target. We then focused on what can we do natively in the cloud in conjunction with our partnership in Azure. And we provide the capability both to use the Azure Blob storage as archive target, as well as converting the data in place. So let's say you've archived your data out to Azure Blob. We can actually help convert that data from the native format that you archived to a native Azure VM format, or VHDX, to allow you to utilize that data in place. Now, it's not to replace Azure Site Recovery Manager, which is a full DR solution, but it is there to help augment the capability and help you test those workloads, as well as provide native backup capabilities for some of your native Azure VM workloads that are running in Azure today. And so when you talk about the hybrid cloud solution, when you have the partnership like we do between Rubrik, Equinix, and Azure, it really allows you to have an extensive holistic solution around hybrid connectivity between your on-premises data center protection, connection out to an Azure cloud, and then data mobility between those locations, utilizing all of our technologies. So again, kind of in summation, the business benefits that Rubrik really drives are business continuity, allowing you to move your data off-site, protect it within an Azure, utilizing the cloud for those low cost, total cost of ownership over a long period of time. Highly focused on security, both around ransomware as well as just overall data protection and security through encryption best practices. And then lastly, automation. One thing I hadn't hit on yet is that Rubrik really was designed from the ground up with RESTful APIs in mind. When we actually came to market 4 years ago, when we released our product, we introduced it to a number of customers and said, this is our amazing product, and here's the RESTful API to interact with it. And our customers actually came back and said, hold on, we're not quite ready for that yet. Can you go back and build a user interface? And so the really cool thing about the Rubrik platform is that our interface is just a consumer of our RESTful API. So if you have automation, if you're using things like Terraform, if you're using Cloud or Chef, Puppet, Ansible to automate any of your processes, Rubrik can be built into all of those workflows with our inherent design. And then lastly, here are some kind of customer benefits that we could go over. I would love to follow up with you later. But lastly, Rubrik really, when we look at the holistic solution around data protection and partnership, having capability to protect your on-premises workload with the Rubrik platform, using an Equinix partner to migrate that data or to provide the migration capability out to a cloud provider such as Azure, really build a holistic solution approach where you have on-premises protection, speed out to the archival location or DR location of choice like Azure, and then recoverability capabilities through that same speed and protection that Azure provides to always have uncompromised data pulled back in if there is any kind of issue on premises. So thanks so much for that, and I will pass it over to the Equinix team.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Evan. Appreciate that. Can everyone hear me okay? We're looking good here. So I should have control. So first of all, thank you, Saurabh and Evan, for kind of walking through that. This is a perfect segue to kind of land the foundation of how this partnership kind of gels together. So I think the key thing to start with here, while the next slide loads, is really thinking about the global footprint that we have together. And this is a representation of the investment that's been made between Microsoft and Equinix in being able to solve for physics, right? Solve for latency. You know, we've talked a lot about the automation, the scalability, how we're securing these things, but it all fundamentally dials back to physics and how are we solving for that, the ability of that data to move. So, you know, as one of the largest Microsoft ExpressRoute providers in the world, we get to work with customers globally that have needs in different Azure compute regions and are trying to both move data into Azure and back data up out of Azure in all these different global markets. So with the Equinix footprint, you know, extending across 210 facilities, over 54 different metros globally, you know, we're really focusing on how can we optimize where the end users are, what regions are they consuming from, and more specifically to today's conversation, how are we optimizing the backup and recovery of that data that might need to live in multiple clouds or across multiple footprints. So fundamentally, if you think about what is Equinix solving for in this equation, it's these four key categories, right? But you know, when we solve for physics, we're solving for performance, right? When we think about how are we maintaining that performance for end users, especially right now as so many users are remote, we know that if those applications are running slowly, or if I'm not able to get my data back quickly, or frankly move it into the cloud quickly, that affects my performance. And that is directly, you know, one of the key pillars that we're solving for. Next, you know, it's certainly, you know, we have a huge partnership with Microsoft globally, but they're not the only public cloud that we work with. We do work with all public clouds and every major SaaS platform you can think of. And so that automation that both Saurabh and Evan highlighted is really fundamental to how we're optimizing that choice and that flexibility to both, you know, leverage the optimized flow of data that might move out of Azure back to on-premise or out of another cloud into Azure. How is that data being encrypted, right? So it's giving yourself the choice, the flexibility, and the right platform to achieve those things. Security, this is huge, right? So if you think about that global platform, Equinix buildings represent the intersections of the internet, and that is key to our history, kind of to Evan's point, how did we get here? Every network service provider under the sun, every wireline, every wireless, every satellite provider in the world peers at Equinix. And then in the next slide, you'll see, but the overwhelming majority of all internet traffic globally flows through our buildings. So if you're able to connect and move that data privately and avoid the public internet wherever possible, that's a huge ability to remove that security vector and that attack plane from your security profile. And with this, you know, very flexible and future-proof baseline foundation, it allows you to iterate on whatever flavor of digital transformation you're working to implement. And what I wanted to highlight here is this number was pre-COVID. As we know, this number is in the tens of millions now of remote users working remotely to consume all these mission-critical applications. So fundamentally, that's what I wanted to really focus on today, is how is Equinix removing the friction, right? How are we removing the friction from both migrating data into the cloud, into Azure, but also backing it up? I mean, these are the critical functions that need to happen to optimize these digital transformation strategies. And this is the stat, right? This is how we're doing that. 96.4% of all global internet traffic is flowing through Equinix buildings. And I think the key there is as well it's not just all the network providers, it's also the Microsoft Azure ExpressRoute backbone that's tied into all of these on-ramps that you saw earlier. It's tied into the core of the internet. So let's just think about for a moment what it looks like today and where customers are going. So many of our customers, both for Microsoft and Rubrik as well, they're coming at this cloud enablement strategy from a very legacy or traditional approach. And in those environments, they're trying to move data or workloads or backup workloads that might be moving to Azure from very physically disparate locations. So you've got these physical data centers or branch locations or users that are not necessarily close to Azure or other clouds. And so it's all about how do we physically shorten that distance? How do we remove that latency and start giving ourselves control planes and control points that are both closer to the users and closer to the clouds. And there's a lot of great things that can happen there. But when you remove that physical latency, that the friction between where the data is being consumed and where it's being generated, amazing things can happen both from a security perspective, from a cost perspective, but most certainly from a performance perspective. And this applies across, I don't care what enterprise or what vertical an enterprise customer might be in. This is healthcare, this is oil and gas, this is, everyone out there is going through this. So I kind of like to bring it back to these diagrams because we really need to think about how does data flow, right? What is data faced with when it's moving from point A to point B? So I use these visual diagrams when you're thinking about the internet, and there's so many things are built to be consumed over the internet, but if data is flowing from left to right, the internet it's always going to be chaotic. It's not going to give you a private path anywhere. You're having to contend with all the other users that might be consuming the internet where you are. It's low cost, but it's also simply not cloud optimized for those very significant workloads of consequence that you might be trying to move into a cloud like Azure. MPLS, it's what everyone's been using for the last decade to connect all of their branch sites and data centers. And it's great because it gives you the ability to connect between any one of those sites that you have. But it's also not following the same path every time. It's not giving you that consistent route between point A and point B, right? So your latency, while better than the internet and better security than the internet, is still not optimized to move data. And that is really where we see a blend of all of these access resources being used to both bring end user sites, remote users, and workloads out of data centers into Azure. And that's really where Equinix comes into the picture here. And that's really where it ties directly into what Rubrik is doing. So if you think about the left-hand side of this diagram, and Josh Shortelay after this is going to whiteboard this in more detail and answer some questions for the audience. But think about where the data sits today in these legacy data centers. And then think about Equinix being those cloud adjacent on-ramps where every single network lives today and they're physically built in. This gives you the ability to move data between Azure and a backup, Rubrik array that also extends back into your on-premise environment with the least amount of latency, with no exposure to the public internet. And this is critical for a couple of reasons. And you heard Saurabh mention it, you heard Evan mention it. The cost savings of not having to move that data out of Azure and back it up over the internet all the way back to your legacy data center, it's a 10x cost reduction if you're going with just a plain run-of-the-mill metered ExpressRoute, your starter package for an ExpressRoute. It goes down from about 12 cents a gig across all clouds over the internet, down to sub 2 cents a gig over a private ExpressRoute in this topology. But you're also dramatically reducing that latency. Anywhere in the world, you are going to be sub 10 milliseconds between Azure Compute and this Equinix edge. In some cases like Silicon Valley and Ashburn, it's sub 2 milliseconds to that compute. So when you don't know exactly how much data you're going to need to back up, this provides that scalable backplane that gives you cost effectiveness and security that allows you to scale as you need. So if you don't know how much data you need to back up, this allows customers to scale quickly and not have to go rebuild infrastructure once they move data sets into Azure. And beyond that, it's about really being able to, once again, move workloads if necessary, to encrypt traffic between clouds, and more importantly, kind of going back to the edge, it also gives you the ability to optimize how is that data flow occurring between the legacy on-premise sites and the cloud. So finally, I want to hand it over to Josh to go a little bit deeper into the whiteboard capability of unpacking a little more about what we're doing and answer any questions we have from the audience.
Thanks, Chad. I think to have my screen take over, we probably have to stop the share so everybody can see it a little bit bigger. But I started kind of just diagramming through what Chad was talking about and thinking in mind what other presenters had discussed, and where the Rubrik solution really comes into play is when we connect all of this through the Equinix Cloud Exchange fabric in order to bring that low latency solution. Now, Chad talked about the 3 different ways right now that you can go about accessing Azure. The first being VPN. It's where most folks start. It doesn't scale very well. The latency is variable. Security is often a challenge. Trying to get more out of it brings diminishing returns. The next pivot that most people look at is their MPLS provider. That can be done as well. They can deliver you a connection through their presence at Equinix over to Microsoft, but there tends to be transit cost per megabyte. When we're talking about backups here, that matters. When we're trying to get that data out of our corporate resource or on-prem location or heritage data center to Azure, doing that through MPLS layer 3 and paying per megabyte may not be very appetizing for an enterprise. And that's where the other option there is that bandwidth on MPLS, it's expensive. It's not low cost. It's not easily accessible. You can't add to an MPLS network and increase bandwidth quickly or necessarily cost effectively. Additionally, because MPLS is effectively, it's a routed network. So it's a routed 2 cans and a spider web sort of design. It's never going to take the same path through this MPLS cloud twice on its way to Azure. It is certainly more secure than the internet because MPLS is a private connection. You're able to secure that. What we're really seeing for these high bandwidth, high data traffic workloads where we're moving things back and forth or even unidirectionally, layer 2 circuits are where that really comes into play. And layer 2 comes in a lot of flavors. That can be Ethernet private line or Ethernet virtual private line. It can be wavelength circuits or Metro Ethernet. It's a number of solutions that we can approach to build, like Chad had mentioned, 2 cans and a string between this heritage location and the edge, where we can push that data through the Rubrik solution into Azure for storage. What that also then enables is, should we be pushed into a business continuity situation and we need that data back, we now have a high bandwidth, low latency path to pull that data back either to the corporate resources, to a hybrid location that could be these corporate resources relocated next to the cloud, living close to the edge. As a slide that Chad had presented described the various latency metrics around workloads as you move them closer to or away from the edge. As we bring those things into here, it enables not only that access to Azure, but there may be resources you need to pull out of other clouds and put into Azure. This enables that high-speed hairpin point to bring things in and out. Are there any questions in the chat, Chad?
I don't see any yet. Let me double check. Not yet, but we'll certainly let you know if we do see some.
Okay. Effectively, what establishing this edge next to Azure enables an enterprise to do is to build that consistent pathway so that there's never a doubt as to how are these workloads, how is this backup environment, how is my disaster recovery, my business continuity environment going to perform? It's always going to perform the same way because it's enabled this layer 2 pathway between origin and destination and back. Furthermore, what this layer 2 pipe enables is it enables the customer to keep the BGP domain between their environment and their VNets in Azure, between their device here at the digital edge and the virtual gateway sitting on the edge of the VNet inside of Azure. If a customer were to go through an MPLS provider, there's going to be the MPLS provider's BGP domain between themselves and Azure, which can present some challenges in terms of speed to deployment, bandwidth availability, and other capabilities. Again, when we look at these layer 2 solutions, it's dedicated bandwidth, dedicated routes with consistent latency that will always perform the way that you as an enterprise are depending on it to perform.
Excellent. Are there any questions out there? I haven't seen any in the chat window, guys, but feel free to, we wanted to open it up to make sure we're addressing anything in real time here. And Todd and Remy, if we want to make sure we've unmuted all participants, we're happy to take live questions as well.
All right. Well, look, someone sometime told me to count to 7, and if no one has any questions, that's probably a good wrap. So we can poll the team just another second here. Maybe something came in the chat window. If not, I think that we are all set. I mean, look, there's multiple things you do with data at the end of the day. You move it, you secure it, you back it up. You make sure that it's recoverable. This partnership that we have is very well established. It's a 360-degree partnership with Rubrik in multiple locations inside Equinix facilities. They have placed a lot of the Rubrik services and resources both in APAC, EMEA, and Americas. And of course, Microsoft has a tremendous investment to deploy their edge node infrastructure inside Equinix facilities globally. So together with the 3 of these companies, it really is about not only what you're consuming in Azure, what you're placing there, and what your strategy is to bridge between hybrid, bridge your hybrid environment between an on-prem environment and multi-cloud, but it's how do you get there? And together, we make that process very simple. So I would like to thank everyone for engaging with us on the call today and staying with us for the full hour. And we'll be following up with you all individually to carry on the conversations. Thank you. Remy, any parting words? Or you think we're all set?
I think we're all set. And I'd like to thank everyone that took the time to jump in. And
I think there is, sorry to interrupt, there's a question on the chat window from Mark. Thank you, Mark, for the question.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Yes, Mark's question is, our data center is in Arizona and much of our workloads are in West US 2. What distance limitations are there with current layer 2 technologies? We are using MPLS today.
There are none. So you could extend a layer 2 circuit from Phoenix to Equinix Seattle, which is where you would get the ExpressRoute on-ramp for the US West 2 region for Azure, which lives in Quincy, Washington. So you would absolutely, you know, if this was Arizona here, a layer 2 circuit provider could nail up an Ethernet private line or an Ethernet virtual private line from Arizona to Seattle for you to reach this digital edge.
Great question. All right. I think that was our last question. So with that, I'd like to additionally, just repeat myself and say thank you. And with that, we'll stop recording. We'll be in touch with you, with each of you individually. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.